being recorded.
Hi everyone and welcome to our week 5 discussion for the Translation Lab report. Thank you all for being here on time. Today we'll be discussing our collaborative translation of the text titled Heart Attack Diagnosis. As you all know, this was the main text we were assigned to translate as part of our group project for this course. Throughout today's session, we'll be sharing our translation experiences, reviewing the challenges we faced, and also reflecting on the overall translation process as a team. I'll be moderating today's session to ensure that the discussions run smoothly and that everyone has an opportunity to share their input. Before we dive into the content, let's begin with a short round of introductions. Please share your name, your assigned role in the translation process, and maybe one quick sentence about your contribution just so we have a clear recap of everyone's involvement.
Okay, hi, I'm Azrul. I work as translator 1 for the first sentence in the text, so I was responsible for opening the translation and setting the tone for the rest of the document. And later on, I also took on the role of reviewer for Faris section to ensure the accuracy and the consistency. And I also focused mostly on clarity and making sure the translation sounded more natural in Malay.
Thank you, Azrul. Next, we will hear from
Hello everyone, I'm Dahin. For this project, I translated one part of the text and also review Azrul's translation as review 1. My main task during the review was to refine vocabulary choices and ensure that the terminology we used was appropriate for medical-related content.
Great, thank you. Moving on, let's hear from our second reviewer, Sohana.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Sohana. I contributed as reviewer 2 and I also translated some of the longer and more detailed sections, such as the part describing the echocardiogram test. My role mainly focused on ensuring accuracy, consistency, and tone, especially because medical texts require clear and precise language.
Thank you, Sohana. And now, Faris.
Right, hello. So my name is Faris and I serve as translator 3 for this assignment. I translated one of the middle sections of the text and also review a portion of the translation that was done by Sohana. I try to make sure that the Malay version maintained the same meaning and remain easy to understand for readers who may not have a medical background.
Thank you, Faris. And lastly, I'm Sayang. I also took part in both translating and reviewing several sections of the text. In addition to that, I'll be moderating today's discussion to guide us through the different parts of our reflection, including the translation process, the reviewing stage, and what we learned from working together as a team. All right, now that everyone has introduced themselves and their roles, let's move into our first agenda of the day. We'll start by briefly summarizing our translation workflow and how we approach the process step by step. So before we move into the detailed discussion of our translation choices, let's briefly go over the translation workflow that we followed as a group. For this task, we use a structured and systematic method to ensure the fairness and the consistency. The process was divided into phases, starting with translator 1 working on the first part of the text, followed by review 1 who check and refine the translation. Then translator 2 continued with the next part, and the cycle repeat until the entire text was complete. This rotating system allowed everyone to experience both translating and reviewing roles. To keep everything organized, we use a shared Google Docs file where we uploaded our drafts, comments, and revisions. This also helped us track the changes made by each member and maintain transparency in our collaborative decisions. Azrul, since you handled the very first phase, could you explain how we started the process
Of course. In the first phase, I began with the opening sentence of the source text, which was ideally, a healthcare provider should screen you during regular checkups for risk factors that can lead to a heart attack. And my first initial translation was, secara idealnya, penyediaan penjagaan kesihatan harus menjalankan saringan ke atas anda semasa pemeriksaan berkala bagi mengenal pasti faktor risiko yang boleh menyebabkan serangan jantung. When translating, I attempted to keep the meaning as close as possible to the source text, and my focus was accuracy and clarity, and since this was the sentence that would set the tone for the entire translation, I tried to maintain a formal tone that aligns with medical context.
All right, thank you. And then the first reviewer for that section was Zahin. You reviewed Azro's work, right?
Yes, I did. When I reviewed the sentence, I noticed that the phrase penjagaan kesehatan sounded slightly less natural for this type of text. It wasn't wrong, but in professional or medical documents, the commonly used term is perkhidmatan kesehatan. So I revised the sentence to make it sound more natural, accurate, and aligned with standard Malay medical terminology. The revised version was, secara idealnya, penyedia perkhidmatan kesihatan harus menjalankan saringan ke atas anda semasa pemeriksaan berkala untuk mengenal pasti faktor risiko yang boleh menyebabkan serangan jantung. The meaning remained the same, but the vocabulary adjustment improved the professionalism of the sentence.
Nice. That's a very clear example of linguistic refinement where the meaning doesn't change, but the tone, accuracy, and the suitability for the medical context are improved.
I agree that small change made a big difference. The revised version sounded like something we would see in a health brochures or official medical documents released by the Ministry of Health Malaysia. It felt more authentic and credible.
Exactly. And I actually completely agree with the edits when I reviewed the comment. It actually highlighted how valuable the reviewing stage is. And it helps catch subtle phrasing issues that the original translators may overlook because they are focused on meaning rather than style.
So, and I think this first phase already set a good standard for the rest of the translation. It showed us that we needed to pay attention not only to meaning, but also to tone, terminology, and how medical texts are typically written in Malay. It helped guide our later decisions.
Okay, next we'll move on to the second and third sentences, which were handled by me and Sohana. This part of the source text focus on how heart attacks are actually usually diagnosed in emergency situations, as well as what typically happens when a patient arrives for treatment. My role here was to produce the initial translation before passing it on for review. My initial translation was, serangan jantung sering didiagnosis dalam situasi kecemasan. Jika anda pernah atau sedang mengalami serangan jantung, penyedia perkhidmatan kesihatan akan mengambil langkah segera untuk merawat keadaan anda. Jika anda mampu menjawab soalan, anda mungkin akan ditanya tentang simptom dan sejarah perubatan anda. In this version, I focus on maintaining accuracy and clarity, especially because the sentence contains procedural information related to medical treatment. I tried to ensure the message sounded direct and easy for the public to understand.
Okay, so when I reviewed Sayang's translation, I identified a few areas that could be refined to sound more aligned with standard medical terminology used in Malaysia. So the first revision was changing the word symptom to gejala. Although both words are understood, gejala is actually the preferred term in formal Malay medical contexts, including those used in government health campaigns and medical brochures. So using gejala would ensure consistency with actual health communication standards. Secondly, I revised the phrase merawat keadaan anda to memberi rawatan terhadap keadaan anda So the original phrase was not wrong, but the revised version sounds more formal and professional. It gives a tone that matches how healthcare procedures are normally described in.
Yes, I completely agree with those edits by Sohana. The changes might seem small, but they significantly improve the tone and suitability of the translation. When dealing with medical content, it's not just about delivering meaning, but it is also about ensuring that the language reflects professionalism and the conventions used in the field.
What I found interesting about this part of the process is how it highlights the value of collaborative reviewing. If Sayang had worked on this alone, the translation would still have been correct. However, by having another member to review it, you were able to elevate the quality and make it more contextually appropriate. This shows that the translation is not just about transferring words between language. It requires sensitivity to the domain, the audience, and the formality level.
Exactly. Medical translation demand consistency with official terminology because the target audience may include both professionals and the public. Using recognized terms enhances credibility and ensures that readers receive information in a way that matches the tone of real health advisories. This collaboration allowed us to refine the text to reach that standard.
So for this part, the translation didn't require major structural changes, but the reviewer's role was crucial in fine-tuning vocabulary and tone. It showed how even minor adjustments can change the perception of accuracy and professionalism in translated medical materials. Moving on, we also work on the section titled Test to Diagnose a Heart Attack. This part was slightly more technical because it involved medical procedures, so we had to be extra careful with terminology and clarity. Before we talk about the specific translations, let's briefly explain how we divide.
Okay, I was responsible for translating the subheading and the introductory sentence for this section. I translated it as, ujian untuk mendiagnosis serangan jantung termasuklah. I chose termasuklah to introduce the list because it flows better in Malay when followed by multiple bullet points. I also made sure the phrasing sounded natural and similar to how Malay health articles present medical tests.
After that, I continued with the first test, which was the electrocardiogram or ECG. This was one of the longer test descriptions, so my focus was on keeping the explanation direct but still medically accurate. I maintained the structure of the original English text to avoid confusion because this is a commonly known procedure and many Malaysians are familiar with the term ECG.
Yes, I reviewed Sayang's translation for the ECG part, and I think it was very well handled. One section that stood out to me was the translation of the description of the ECG wave reading. The phrase gelombang yang dipaparkan di screen atau dicetak di atas kertas was an excellent choice. It sounds exactly like how medical practitioners describe ECG readings in Malay health brochures and hospital documents. The sentence was clear, formal, and medically suitable without being overly technical for the average reader.
Thank you, Surhana. I tried to stay close to actual medical terminology used by the Ministry of Health, by the Ministry of Health, so that the translation feels authentic.
For me, one thing that I appreciated across this entire section was how we maintain the consistent terminology for medical tools and procedures. Terms like electrode, catheter, penanda jantung, and ujian darah were used consistently by each translators. that consistency is important in scientific and medical translation because using multiple different terms for the same item can confuse the reader and affect clarity. So it was actually good that we all align on using the same standard vocabulary.
Yes, I also agree. And for my part, I translate the section on blood tests. Even though it was shorter than the ECG section, I still face a small challenge. The source text mentioned heart proteins leaking into the bloodstream after the heart muscle is damaged. Directly translating leaking as bucho can sometimes sound a bit informal or odd in medical context. So I had to choose the right wording. In the end, I decided to use protein jantung perlahan-lahan bocor ke dalam darah. It keeps the meaning accurate while remaining understandable for non-medical readers.
Yes, that was a very natural and accurate translation. It conveys the meaning clearly without sounding awkward or too literal. And when I reviewed your part, I didn't feel the need to modify anything because the explanation was concise and it also retained the scientific tone of the original text.
What I also like is that all of us made sure that the list of tests sounded cohesive, even though different translators worked on different test descriptions when compiled. The whole section still reads as if one person wrote it. That shows the effectiveness of our reviewing process.
All right, moving on to phase 2 of our workflow, which was the error hunt session. This was the stage where we went through the entire translated text together to spot any remaining mistakes, inconsistencies, or areas that needed polishing. The goal here wasn't just to correct grammar, but also to refine style, tone, and terminology so that the final output reads smoothly and professionally. So, what were some of the issues or points of debate that we identified during this stage?
Okay. One of the main issues we noticed was inconsistency in tone and level of formality. At certain points, we used a very formal register, and in other parts, the language sounded slightly semi-formal. For example, we debated on the use of anda versus pesakit. The word anda is more direct and reader-friendly, which suits public health information. However, pesakit is more commonly used in medical documents and clinical settings. After discussing it, we decided to stick with anda for this translation because the target audience was the general public, not medical specialists. Using anda keeps the message personal, empathetic, and easy to connect with.
Yes, and I think that decision really shaped the tone of the whole piece. We didn't want it to sound like a technical report written for doctors or medical students. We wanted the style to match articles on the Ministry of Health website or health education pamphlets. So even though Pesakit is technically more formal and help maintain a more approachable and conversational tone, which suits our purpose better.
And another key point we discussed was the use of borrowed medical terms from English, especially abbreviations for medical procedures such as MRI and CT scans. In Malay, these terms are commonly written in English because translations like imbasan, resonance, magnetic are rarely used by the public and may confuse readers. So we agreed that keeping terms like MRI, CT scans, and ECG in their standard English forms, and it aligns with the actual Malaysian's medical writing practice. This ensures that clarity and it avoids over-translation, which can make the text sounds unnatural.
I agree with everyone. This also ties into our consistency approach. We didn't want some test names to be translated and others not, because that would seem inconsistent and unprofessional. Another stylistic point we worked on was sentence flow. Malay sentences often follow a different structure than English. For example, in English, sentences commonly start with the subject followed by the action. However, in Malay, it often sounds more fluid to begin with the process or the context. So instead of writing image jantung dan dada dihasilkan oleh ujian ini, we change it to ujian ini menghasilkan image jantung dan dada. This revision made the sentence sounds more natural, direct, and in line with typical Malay.
True. We also reviewed grammar, consistency of tense, and narrative perspective throughout the text. Even though medical explanations can become quite technical, we try to keep the narration in a consistent present tense to reflect ongoing medical procedures and general facts. We made sure pronouns, terminology, and descriptive structures remained uniform from start to finish. This helped avoid sudden shifts in voice or formality that could distract the reader.
Something else I found valuable during this phase was how we supported our correction with examples. Instead of just saying this sounds wrong, we explain why a phrase needed improvement, whether stylistically, grammatically, or culturally. It helped all of us improve as translators, not just fix the text.
Exactly, and that's ultimately what the error hunt phase achieved. Not just correcting individual sentences, but also to ensure the final translation was cohesive, polished, and aligned with real-world medical communication standards. Okay, next we'll move into the reflection part of our discussion. This section focuses on the cultural and linguistic considerations behind our translation choices. The question is, why do you think some differences occurred in our translations even though we were working on the same text and aiming for the same meaning? So let's explore the reasons behind those differences. Let's start with Azrul.
Okay, thank you, Sayang. And one of the main reasons is that each of us came in with different translation styles and preferences, and some of us tended to translate more literally because we wanted to preserve the original sentence structure and wording. But meanwhile, others leans toward a more communicative or dynamic approach, prioritizing fluency and natural flow in Malay. These stylistic differences are normal because translation is not just a linguistic process, but it also involves personal judgment. Even when two translators share the same goal, they may phrase things differently based on what they consider clearer or more appropriate.
I agree. And I think our linguistic exposure plays a big part too. We all grew up consuming different forms of Malay. Some of us read more academic texts, while others are more familiar with media or public-oriented materials. This affects how we choose words. For instance, in the medical field, some terms are borrowed directly from English like stress or MRI, while others have well-established Malay equivalents like instead of symptom. Depending on our previous knowledge of reading or reading habits, we may naturally choose one form over the other. That's why reviewing was important. It helped us standardize terms so the final product.
Cultural expectations also influence our choices in Malay culture, especially within health education materials. The tone is expected to be respectful, professional, and polite. We avoided extremely direct or dramatic expressions because they could sound insensitive or unprofessional in a healthcare context. For example, instead of phrases that evoke fear or panic, we use calm, informative language. This aligns with how health messages usually communicate in Malaysia. The tone should reassure, educate, and guide the public rather than frighten them.
Okay, so another factor was sentence structure differences between English and Malay. English sentences can be very descriptive with multiple clauses joined together. But in Malay writing, especially for informational or instructional content, shorter and clearer sentences are preferred for better readability. So we often made the decision to split long English sentences into 2 or 3 shorter Malay ones. This wasn't changing the meaning, it was adapting to the reading habits and linguistic norms of Malay readers. This falls under translation strategies such as transposition and modulation, where structured to increase.
Yes, and this shows that translation isn't just about language, it's also about knowing the audience. Our readers are not medical professionals, so accessibility was more important than technical sophistication.
All these factors show why our individual drafts differed at first, even though we were translating the same lines. But that is also the strength of collaborative translation. When we combine our work, we balance each other's strengths. Some of us were more detail-oriented in grammar, others were stronger in natural phrasing, and others had good knowledge of medical terminology. Through discussion and reviewing, we produced a final version that was clearer, more consistent, and culturally suitable for Malaysian readers. In the end, the teamwork helped us refine the translation beyond what any of us could have achieved individually. So, all right, that's all for today. Thank you everyone for your cooperation throughout this project. We have covered translation choice, revision strategies, and reflections on teamwork. So thank you.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.